parents, on my mother's side and my father's side, both of them, my great-grandfathers were in the land caring, land management, cranberry business. My great-grandfather worked for Joseph Wharton down in, was in charge of his farms down there, what we know as the Wharton State Forest. And then my great-grandfather and my grandfather were all cranberry people working for a family that owned a lot of bogs and stuff like that. So I thought it would make sense to kind of so the iron industry kind of faded away right around 1840, right around that time period.
You can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, I got my back, so I can't really tell what's going. Yeah, that's my our cranberry farm here in Medford. It's a 1,000-acre property, and I can get into that in a little bit. Oh, you got the whole history here, Larry. So the iron industry had met its demise around 1840 or so. So prior to that, Cape Cod, a fellow named Henry Hall had discovered cranberries growing in the wild in Cape Cod, and he saw where the sand was blowing off the sand dunes there, and the cranberries prospered. So cultivated cranberry business began on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, about 1820. So as time would go on, about 1835 or so, a lot of the landowners here in the South Jersey Pinelands area, a fellow by the name of John Webb in Cassville, about 1835, he started playing with cultivating cranberries. And along with him was a fellow who had started a cranberry bog in Southampton, Burrs Mills. His name was Benjamin Thomas. Bring it a little closer to here. Big landowner around here was a fellow named William R. Braddock. William R. Braddock started growing cranberries on the Atzion Road in Chemung. And if you ever go by Atzion Road going towards the dragway down that way, you'll see a sign that says Braddock's Folly. Because all the people around 1835, they're like, what's William R. Braddock doing? He's growing cranberries. He's never going to succeed at that. So that's how the cranberry business kind of got started around here. Early beginnings. And then in Pemberton Township, there was a grower whose name was Joseph White. And Joseph White had connections to a family who are longtime colonials of the area, the Fenwick family. And he also had seen what was going on in Massachusetts. So Joseph White started growing cranberries in Pemberton about 1854. Along about that same time, there was a fellow named Joseph Henchman who was of Haddonfield. He was working in the village of Medford. He was clerking there about 1857, and he began acquiring property in the Taunton Lakes section in South Medford. And he had eventually became the largest cranberry grower in the world at that time. Joseph Henchman, 1857. Okay. So he's growing cranberries in all the lake.
Can you repeat the name?
Joseph C. Henchman. Yep, he was a bachelor man. He was from Haddonfield, and he acquired over 3,000 acres of cranberry bogs in the Medford, Taunton, Mimosa lakes, all the lakes down in the south end of town. He owned all of those and had beautiful properties. He had a beautiful mansion, and he had a park like where people would come for picnics and stuff right at Taunton, right where the Larson Mansion is today. It was I have been told a lot of oral histories of this area from my father, my uncle, and a lot of the old Quakers, who told me a lot of these stories about all these areas. So that's how I know quite a bit about them. So about 1857, they're having picnics at Taunton. All the Quakers. Medford is filled with a lot of people, large landowners that are Quakers. And I could rattle off the names: Evans and Wills, the Shreves family, the Braddock family, the Boker family here a little closer to Medford Lakes. They're all interested in cranberry growing. So Joseph Evans and Joshua Wills were at a picnic at Taunton Lakes, and they're like, wow, we see all this stuff Joseph Henchman's doing. We own all kind of ground. We own ground in what's modern-day Kings Grant, an area called Friendship in Tabernacle. We want to get into cranberry growing. So thus the Evans and Wills Company was born, and they developed a property called Friendship in Tabernacle in 1868. They developed another property called Willow Farm, which is modern-day Kings Grant. Another property, which is now the Black Run Preserve, that was called Busby's Bogs. And then they had another property, which is ours, Coexon. Okay, all right, now, okay, so Medford Lakes in particular, which is coming off of the Etna furnace era, that is in the Ballinger family. The Ballinger family owned Medford Lakes. They're cutting wood. This was all part of the Reed tract. It was like 9,000 acres of forest. And at that time, there was a sawmill at Lower Etna Lake. There's a sawmill at Camp Occonequin called Busby's Mill. And all that 8,000, 9,000 acres of forest is being cut. That's another industry that's going on about the time. They're cutting all kinds of wood to build the village of Medford. They're like, Medford just had become incorporated in 1847. So you have all that going on. So they're supplying wood for homes. So all right, I'm moving along a little bit. I got to catch my breath here a little bit before we get too far along. So I'm kind of setting the stage. So the Ballinger family owned this. They're always looking for ways. They have a farm. They're looking for ways to make money. Everybody wants to make money. So that's what's going on. The cranberry business, you have all these mill ponds and all that, where they've had sawmills. Hey, cranberries are growing naturally. I'll get to that in just a second. But the cranberries are growing naturally, and here's a demonstration of what they look like. Moss and cranberry vines. But they're all out in these wetland areas that were once iron ore bogs, and they were part of the mill ponds. So that 1870 era, that's when these guys, they're really getting into it. The Ballingers are doing the same thing here. They're planting cranberry vines. Why are they planting cranberry vines? Well, in that 1860, 1870 era, vitamin C is a really big thing. There's no oranges or anything like that. Cranberries. They're producing cranberries. Cranberries are worth a lot of money. Red gold during that whole period of 1860 to about 1910. They're shipping cranberries on boats to prevent scurvy, vitamin C deficiency. And so they're fetching a lot of money. So everybody, that's anybody, if you're a bartender, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, and you live in the Medford Village, they're all trying to plant cranberry bogs during that whole period. So they're following the examples of these fellows here. The Evans and Wills Company, which is our cranberry farm, which got started about 1871. So all that land that was being cut off for timber and everything like that, 1847, Medford's a community incorporated, paying taxes. What was happening is that a lot of this property was going up for sheriff sales. They would cut all the wood off. The ground was deemed useless. So all that helped to push, to acquire lands for cranberry farming. So Coexon Farm is, it's very similar to Medford Lakes. So they're growing cranberries here in Medford Lakes, and they're growing them in Lower Etna, Upper Etna. They're growing them here in Ballingers, and most all the little ponds here, Beach 3, all that. They're growing cranberries in all that setting. What happened is this area had, the big stream coming through Etna, coming out of Camp Occoneck, and it was called Rakestraw Stream. All these streams are coming through, and they're wet bogs. So this is a picture of our cranberry farm, 50 acres of cranberry bogs. There's probably, Medford Lakes is a tract of almost a square mile, a little more than a square mile, mile and a half, close to 1,000 acres. They're probably close to 150 acres of cranberry bogs at that time here. So this property also was about 101 acres, very similar in size properties. And so they're doing cranberries. They're doing cranberries here in Medford Lakes, the Ballinger family. I talked about the Bokers around Medford Pines. They're growing cranberries there. The south end of Medford there's 3,000 acres of cranberry bogs. There's only 3,000 acres in the whole state today of cranberry bogs. So it's just phenomenal that 3,000 acres were here in Medford and Medford Lakes. And this is showing some of the dry harvesting machines there. There's an old-time Medford guy. His name's Leon Gaskell. He used to work on the Quexon farm when it was owned by Francis Sharpless. And then, like say, 1996, my partner and I acquired the property from Mr. Sharpless, and we were able to have the 1,000 acres today and the cranberry bogs. So there, my father and another old guy there, they're sorting some cranberries. But all this work was going on. There's to build these bogs. There's an old Model A dump truck. They would dig the dirt, off the property, and they would maintain all the dams. They were all earthen dams with wooden floodgates, just like Medford Lakes was once upon a time. And then, of course, the 2004 flood, the big wooden gates up in Occoneck and all like that, they had deteriorated, sadly. But, yeah, the New Jersey Pine Barrens, you have Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Plymouth County, Oregon, Washington State, Quebec, they're all cranberry growing regions. Yeah. So we've kind of diversified quite a bit. The property that the Quexon was always what we call dry harvest. It was always fresh fruit. But there's a good picture there, water harvesting. They're simply an unripe cranberry that's picked late in August and it's turned into white cranberry wine. And we have a winery that acquires. And so that's a nice little fit in addition to the dry harvesting. All fresh fruit, and we have some, I can't move because you're, yep, I'm like, yeah, that's, so fresh cranberries, that's our mainstay. These were harvested about the 5th of October, so months later, they're all just as good as the day they were picked. So that's one thing about cranberries. And what the old-timers did and what I did to keep these in good shape, they're kept in the vines, what we call the chaff. So we keep them in the chaff until we're ready to use them. And then we have a series of machines that clean them and bounce them, and then they're ready to be sent off to market. But in the olden days of Medford Lakes and Quexon and all, back about 1880, 1890, men and women and children were crawling across the cranberry vines right there on their hands and knees, and they were picking these things by hand. And a lot of the Italians out of Philadelphia and New York and different areas, that was their beginnings of coming here and working on the cranberry farms to get out of the city and make a few dollars. And so that was like the boom era of cranberrying here in Medford in particular. You had these Quaker families that owned large tracts of land. They were fairly wealthy people. They were able to employ hundreds of these Italian immigrants to come here and do the work. And, so that industry, it went on till about 1910 or so. It was just very prosperous times. You know, the older families were maintaining these properties, and there was money to be made. As with any industry, people get old, people die off. The next generation may not be interested in continuing. And then I have my example here that I wanted to kind of show you, and I can't pick this up, so I'll have to come back and forth. But you can come up here later and look at this and explain a couple theories that I have. The bogs here in Medford Lakes, along with a lot of the bogs in Medford, they were beautiful when they were originally planted. But the maintenance, once you lost, you know, the generations that couldn't afford to pay for the help, you lost the ability. All these areas had a stream running through them, and they had ditches everywhere to drain them. And they had high banks. You know, the high banks along Lower Etna. That was common. Taunton, Centennial, they were very high banks, and the water table was so high seeping out of those banks that they had to put ditches in everywhere. So if you didn't maintain those ditches continually, the moss would creep in and eventually overtake the cranberry vines. So very labor-intensive business. And the cranberry industry began here in this Medford environment, but it has transitioned to where we know it now as the Hog Wallow Chatsworth area is the epicenter of the cranberry world. Why? You know, it even began a change on our farm. You know, now we have 50 acres of bogs where once there was 100. The 50 went out of production because of the reasons I just explained. Too wet, too much seepage coming in, just, you know. And about 1920, there was a disease in the cranberry vines. Most of the growers had one particular variety called a Hal, and they'd gotten this false blossom disease, which was almost impossible to control, and that would devastate bogs that, you know, had it in them, and a lot of the growers went out of business for that reason. Too wet, false blossom, the bogs sit idle. Is there any way we could go back to the pictures of the bogs? You know the one I'm talking about, right? All right, kind of right there. I know it's hard to see, but to the best of my knowledge, like Medford Lakes here, that would have been, the one picture to the right would have been typical of about the time Leon Todd was buying the, you know, speculating here in Medford Lakes. The bogs were beginning to grow up. They're wet. They had those high banks. So that's kind of, you know, and in the glory days, the bog would look like to the left there. When they were, you know, when they were first planted in the 1870s, they would have a good run. You know, the growers would attempt to keep them weed-free as much as possible. So that's kind of very typical. And speaking for Taunton, like I say, it was very similar. You know, had those high banks and a, you know, a good stream of water, and they were beautiful in their day when there were 100 people that could work on them and take care of them, because they're very, very unforgiving if you don't take good care of them. Ambrielle, help me out. What am I forgetting? I'm off track a little bit.
No, I think that's great.
But water.
So just to like kind of complete the whole presentation, we're going to talk about seeing the source and like keeping water.
Yeah.
For cranberry growers.
Question, please.
Yes.
Is that the reason that the train arrived to Medford, maybe to move the production or something?
That was a good part of the reason the train came to Medford. Yeah, because cranberries were shipped out on the rail cars. Many cranberries were shipped out from Medford there. Yes.
Nobody talks about the train and why it got the train here. There is not too much information.
Yeah. My mother, my grandfather was a station agent at Atzion for the Central Railroad. which handled all the cranberries in that part of the world. Chemung and the far corner of Medford, West Jersey bogs, a lot of their berries went out on the Central Railroad. So yeah, yep.
Since you don't have all those people today to do all that work and hand pick those, how do you harvest them today?
So today, we have the pick, that picker right there is technology from 1947. That particular picker is called a Western picker. It was developed in Coos Bay, Oregon in 1947. And that actual picker is from 1969. And it just gets a new motor every 4 or 5 years. The technology, most of the cranberry technology for picking is 100 years old. For cleaning them, there are 2 ways of cleaning these fresh cranberries. When they're taken off the vine, they have to make a series of bounces on a machine called a Hayden separator, which was developed by Lothrop Hayden in 1887. And then Joseph Henchman perfected on that model as well. So the cranberries have to go through a series of 9 bounces, which started out as a fellow who bounced them down some steps. He knew that the bad ones didn't bounce, the good ones bounce. Yeah, so it's old technology that still works, and even the machines, they just rebuild them because they're all made out of this really beautiful white pine and stuff like that came from Massachusetts. So yeah, so they're showing a conveyor belt, picking out the bad ones. Fortunately, a lot of that has been improved technology. Where we send our berries to a place down in Hamilton called Donio's, they actually have electronic eyes that pick out berries that aren't perfectly colored, they're rotten, and some of that machinery can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So a little grower, you can't afford that, so you have to have somebody else that you end up selling to. Yes?
There's a building in Taunton right next to the mansion. I have a photograph, I don't know how old it is, and it says Blue Lake on top of it. And I've been told that was used as a cranberry packing house at one point. Do you have any information about that?
I believe it was, but there was a huge cranberry packing house that burned in a fire back. Bud, help me out.
It was in the 80s.
And
It became the school.
became the school, yeah. Yep,
So
yeah.
it was cranberry
That was the packing house. I'm pretty sure the one that burned, Bud.
Packing house fire,
In Taunton.
packing house fire in Taunton.
There was cranberry. There was a school, they called it at that time when it caught fire and all. But
in the 80s, I think.
yeah. Yep.
With I know when you deal with the blueberries and they normally pick them by hand and they'll send the machine in afterwards, and because once you send a machine in, they say it's completely done.
Right.
You can't decide which is which.
Right.
Is that the same thing with the cranberries, where it's when you send the machine in, it's a complete harvest at that point, whether you got good ones, bad ones?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. You can float, after you dry harvest, you can float the other ones you didn't get, and you could sell them as processed fruit. So that kind of very similar. Yeah. Yeah, anything that they can make juice out of, which they're pretty forgiving with the fruit to make juice and stuff like that. Yeah.
Do you have tours? There used to be tours that they were pretty popular.
Yeah. I think my daughter's...
We're in the works of setting things up, so once it's finalized.
You can advertise in the Medford.
Yeah, we will. We're working on it. It's a lot of processing.
Yeah.
But the water is the real big deal. You have to have really super clean water. So our water, we have to test it, and we get it tested when it leaves the property, it's tested. And the tests come back that it's pristine, which is amazing to think about, as close as we all are to civilization. Thanks to Medford Lakes Borough, years and years ago, having the sewer plant and all those things have saved water quality in the area. Yes?
Hi there. In the fall, if you go on the Pinelands Preservation Alliance website, they will have tours listed, one of which is the one in Southampton.
Yep.
And that's been 4 generations.
Yep.
Cranberry
Tommy Budd, yep.
And I'm sure you're, as we were told, you're all in the Ocean Spray Cooperative?
No, that's not true, no. So, when I was a young man, there were 73 cranberry growers in the state of New Jersey. Today, there are about 13. So that 13, 2 of us are what's called independents. So we don't belong to the Ocean Spray Cooperative. Just by default, it's kind of just how things happen. The fellow that owned our farm was old school, going back to the 1870s here, and he was fiercely independent. They were adamant about not water picking and doing stuff like that. And so we kind of held with that tradition as much as we could. Yeah.
I saw a video the other day, actually, about a cranberry bog, and they said that if you wanted to work there, you had to make sure that you weren't afraid of spiders, because wolf spiders are actually really good for the cranberry bog.
Yes, they are. They eat the bad insects that hurt the cranberries.
During this period of time, there were some major forest fires that came through the Pine Barrens,
Yep.
which is where your bogs were.
Yep.
What effect did they have immediately and long term with the bogs?
Well, there was a huge fire in 1954, what was called the Chatsworth Fire, and it went through a region of Tabernacle called Moore's Meadows. And it was a nice cranberry region. Lots of families owned bogs there, and a good portion of the bogs were destroyed in that fire because it was in the summertime, and burned all the cranberry bogs. A lot of those properties never recovered. They never went back into the cranberry business. Hampton Bogs in Chemung Township, same thing. There were 400 acres of cranberry bogs. All 400 acres burned in the Chatsworth Fire in 1954. It was a horrific fire. It was almost 20,000 acres, and all the natives of the area all remembered it. To this day, anyone that was around remember it. And the remarkable thing about that particular fire was that the 20,000 acres burned, and one evening a thunderstorm came through with 70-mile-an-hour winds, and the entire 20,000 acres relit up again. And it terrified people. They were so afraid they got in their refrigerators, in their homes. They didn't know what was going to happen. And a lot of the natives talk about it to this day. Yeah. Yeah, but
Where's your farm again?
it's off Hawken Road. It's an area bounded by Hawken, Skeet, Medford Lakes Tabernacle, Dixon Town, and Prickett's Mill Road. Yeah, so very, very similar dynamics to Medford Lakes. Very similar in size. A lot of the the old timers that worked and owned property here in the borough. Bill Thackra probably comes to mind, right, Bud? There, did you remember the Thackra family that owned? Yeah, they owned a lot of property right up against the golf course and everything. Yeah, and so you're up.
Hi, I'm trying to wrap my head around the lakes as I know them today versus the cranberry bog. So let's say like Lower Etna or Ballinger or the Beach 3 Lake. In the time of them being cranberry bogs, were they as deep as they are now, just without the water?
Not.
And this is what existed on the floor of the lake?
They're pretty close. When the lakes are drained, like Taunton Lakes is drained right now, you can pretty much visualize. It's pretty much very similar to the cranberry bog days. And I'll walk over here, and you guys can come up later. But this is what you'll see on the upper ends of all those lakes. These are all native cranberry vines. And that's what got everybody thinking about these things, all these vines, and they would propagate them. And just think about all those thousands of acres I talked about. Men and women were going along, and they were taking cuttings like this. And when that ground was cleared up, and they were punching those cuttings in the ground by hand. Somebody was dropping vines. They would get vines from Massachusetts. They would get the most productive vines they could find in the region, and then they would go to other states to bring vines. So there are cranberry vines growing here in New Jersey. They came from Cape Cod. They came from Plymouth County. They came from Oregon, all over. We have cranberry vines growing at our place that we planted that are from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of the leading It is the leading cranberry state in the country.
When Leon Todd bought Medford Lakes in 1927, were the lakes then active cranberry bogs, or were they just lakes?
No, they were returning to the wild, like that picture I showed. They were growing up. There were patches of vines and stuff like that, but the trees and stuff were starting to take over. Yeah. So I'd have to actually research the actual date when things started, but it was right around that 1910, 1915 when things were on the way out, and a lot of properties, a lot of the properties. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about the aquifer.
Yep.
Since there was so much water required for the cranberry,
Yes.
is it true that Philadelphia tried to buy
It is true.
from
Yeah.
New Jersey?
Well, Joseph Wharton had a plan, and if you ever go down to Badstow, you can see this wonderful map and everything. He had a brilliant plan. He knew that Philadelphia would need water, because the water wasn't that great. And he had developed this whole series of ideas. He owned most of everything. He didn't own Taunton. He didn't own Medford Lakes, but they were on his radar because they were all going to be an aqueduct system that would lead the water from down around Atzion and Badstow. It would lead it up through all these series of aqueducts and piping and all through Taunton Lakes. Taunton would be a reservoir, Medford Lakes would be a reservoir, and he had a whole plan of how to get that water to the city of Philadelphia. So he passed away. Well, New Jersey legislator got wind of that, and they were like, New Jersey water for New Jersey people. And he died in 1909, so he never, that was the end of that vision. Yeah.
One of the largest ones.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Wharton owned 100,000+ acres during that time period. Probably a little bit more. And different properties he had, his friends. His friend was Andrew Ryder College. He wanted to grow cranberries just to the south of Atzion. So he carved out, if you ever look at a map of Wharton, you'll see these big exceptions, like towards Hamilton and all. And he gave that, or sold that piece of ground to Andrew Ryder so he could grow cranberries and stuff down there. So, yeah. But the whole aquifer, and I listened to a lot of it. That's the whole reason we have the Wharton Forest, is because of the water underneath of it and the surface water there. That's why the state acquired it in 1954. Yeah. So we have the cranberries. This is called the peck box. We have the scoop that came along a little later. That came along about 1900. Up before that, they were doing everything by hand. They were taping their fingers up and stringing out the bogs. But this little description over here shows you the old school, and that's a little bit more modern, those purple vines with sand. Everybody kind of went from moss and wetness to the modern cranberry grower that likes a moist environment, but not too moist. So that's what the cranberry's like. I know I'm rambling on way too much, but thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Thanks to Tom for being willing to present. Thanks to Andrea for getting in contact with us. This is exactly the sort of event that Gail and I are hoping for. Clearly, there's a lot of knowledge about this industry embedded in the people who do the work, and it's pretty exciting that it's being shared with those of us who have never heard it, particularly me, an import from Michigan. So thank you for coming. Thanks to Tom. And this lecture is going to kind of set this theme for this second year of these lectures. Come May, we're going to have one of the curators from White Swan coming to speak about the blueberry industry. And then Ross Barnett, who spoke at the Protestant Community Church Fellowship Breakfast on Saturday about the clams of the Barnegat Bay. Well, it was a good audience, but a small one. We're going to repeat that come the fall and make it available to more people to hear. So we're kind of touching on these core industries, occupations that form the Pinelands. And thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And please, while we're breaking down, take some time to mingle, to look at the items that Tom brought, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Here's your...
That went really well. I'm really pleased.